I don't know.
we're the easy targets. And it's funny you say that. I was sitting in a class one day, probably about a year and a half ago. And it's one of those ethics classes. And let me tell you, I love being one of the few black people in an ethics class because you get to talk about racial situations outside of your typical American's thought process of race, right? Because a lot of people think that race is an American thing, and it's not. Racism is an American thing, not an international thing, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about South Africa, and we're talking about the mines in South Africa, and there the mine workers spoke one language, the black mine workers. Then you have the white middle management speaking their own language, and all of like the directions and everything is in that language that they speak. And this is in the early to mid 1990s, so you know apartheid is still like it's still fresh.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the issues that are happening, like the lack of safety there, the lack of reporting of safety incidents, and all this bullshit. And the white kids are bumping their heads with each other, talking about, well, I see that in a few years this will fix itself because eventually the managers will learn the language of the native people, or the native people will move up and be able to get management positions because this is over, because apartheid is over, and it'll work itself out in about 10 to 20 years. And I go, segregation legally ended in America in 1964. You see what we got going on now? And they're like, it had nothing to say because the here's the thing about white privilege that I think gets missed in so many white privilege conversations. It's not how amazing it is and the stuff that it gets you. It's the stuff that it allows you to be ignorant to and still be successful.
Right. And it's interesting that you brought up South Africa, because I don't know if we talked about this, but I did my study abroad in South Africa. So I was there for a semester. And yeah, so also the mines were also instrumental in, I guess, passing forward HIV and AIDS, because they would have like a group of, I guess prostitutes would be the term. And those same prostitutes would service like the entire dorm. And then those men would go back to their families and spread it to their families that way. So the mines are great for so many reasons. Obviously, I'm kidding. But yeah, there's a lot of complexity in South Africa. And it is interesting. Like I always say, I would not want to be anything other than like a Black or brown person, because I think our world is colored in a way that if you're white, you don't necessarily see. There's like, they called like the veil, Du Bois's The Veil. It's like you're constantly viewing yourself in the eyes, like through your own eyes, but through the eyes of other people. And so you're constantly making that, making these assertions in your mind before you even act, because you're like, okay, so they're going to think this about me, so then I'm going to do this, and you're constantly having this conversation with yourself, which also slows you down, right? Like the point of racism is to slow you down, because you got to justify X, Y, and Z. You worried about X, Y, and Z, and you can't even do what you came here to do because you got all these roadblocks. But yeah, it is interesting how you can put forth literally the same exact thing that happened in our own history, and people can't see it. They can't see history repeating themselves. They can't see patterns. It's like, yeah, I also did a lot of ethics work when I was at University of North Carolina for community-based participatory research, which is just, and it's like, in the simplest form, it's essentially when the researcher works with a community member on a project. But there are a lot of ethical issues with that because there can be issues of incentive, like or people don't feel like they have choice or agency. You basically don't really use the community partner. You have their name on it, but you didn't ask them for any advice on any part of your study. So did they really work with you, or did they just provide you with people? There's so many ethical considerations in research, but also, like, as you said, it's a really great vantage point with which to approach racial problems in a way that makes people feel more comfortable because it seems more theoretical.